You formed an opinion about that person before they finished their first sentence. Not about one thing, about everything. Their intelligence, their honesty, their competence, their character. And from that moment, everything they did confirmed what you had already decided. Every piece of information they gave you after that first moment was processed through the lens of what you had already decided. If they confirmed it, you noticed. If they contradicted it, you found a way to discount it. You called it reading people. You called it good instincts. You called it intuition. Edward Thorndike called it a constant error. And he documented it in the United States Army in 1920. Not in a psychology lab. In a war. The bias he found that year was not subtle. It was systematic, measurable, and almost impossible to override. It is running inside you right now. You have never turned it off. You cannot. Thorndike did not discover this in a moment of insight. He discovered it by looking at data that made no statistical sense. Edward Lee Thorndike was a psychologist at Columbia University. He had spent most of his career studying how animals and humans learn. In 1920, he published a paper called A Constant Error in Psychological Ratings. The paper was 3 pages long. It described a finding that would take a century to fully map. What Thorndike had found was not a quirk of military culture. He suspected it was something much more fundamental about how human evaluation works. Thorndike had asked commanding officers in the Army to rate their soldiers across a set of independent traits. Physical appearance, intelligence, leadership ability, personal qualities. Each one was supposed to be evaluated on its own. The correlations Thorndike found between those ratings were far too high to be real. A soldier rated high on physique was almost automatically rated high on intelligence. High on intelligence meant high on leadership. High on leadership meant high on character. The ratings were not measuring different things. They were measuring the same thing. The officer's overall impression of the soldier. Thorndike named the mechanism a halo, one positive trait casting a glow over everything else. The officers were not lying. They were not being careless. They genuinely believed they were evaluating each trait independently. That is the part that makes it a bias rather than just a mistake. It happens without awareness. The person doing it does not know it is happening. Most cognitive biases leave some trace of themselves in awareness. You feel uncertain. You feel the pull of the error. The halo effect does not do that. It presents as clarity. The judgment feels clean, confident, self-evident. That is what makes it structurally different from a simple mistake. The same mechanism works in reverse. One negative trait casts a shadow over everything else. Thorndike noted this too. Researchers later named the reverse the horn effect. The devil's horns where the halo used to be. Both are the same mechanism running in opposite directions. One impression coloring all subsequent judgment. Thorndike's paper was read, cited, and acknowledged. Nobody seriously challenged the finding. But nobody had yet asked what it meant for how we understand our own minds. Thorndike published the finding and moved on. For decades, the halo effect was noted and largely accepted as a curiosity. Then, in 1977, 2 researchers asked the question Thorndike had not. Richard Nisbett and Timothy Wilson ran a study at the University of Michigan. They split students into 2 groups. Both groups watched a videotaped interview with the same professor, a Belgian man with a noticeable accent. Group 1 saw a version where the professor was warm, enthusiastic, clearly enjoying the conversation. Group 2 saw a version where the same professor was cold, distant, inflexible. After watching, both groups rated the professor on unrelated attributes. His appearance, his mannerisms, his accent. The group that saw the warm version rated his accent as appealing, his appearance as attractive, his mannerisms as likable. The group that saw the cold version rated the identical accent as irritating, the same appearance as less attractive, the same mannerisms as off-putting. Same person, same voice, same face. 2 completely different people, depending entirely on one initial impression. 2 groups, same man. 2 completely incompatible realities, each feeling like an accurate observation of the same objective facts. But that was not the finding that changed everything. After rating the professor, the students were asked directly, did the warmth or coldness of the professor influence your ratings of his other qualities? Almost all of them said no. The students whose ratings had been most dramatically altered by the warm or cold condition were the most confident that they had not been influenced at all. The bias was invisible to the people experiencing it. Not because they were not paying attention, because the brain does not log its own corrections. You do not feel the halo forming. You feel the judgment that came out of it. And that judgment feels like observation, not distortion. When Nisbett and Wilson probed further, they found that participants did not just fail to report the influence. They actively generated alternative explanations for their ratings. Explanations that were coherent, specific, and completely wrong. The explanations felt true from the inside. There was no signal of confabulation, no sense of making something up. What Nisbett and Wilson had found was not just the halo effect. They had found that people have no reliable access to the causes of their own judgments. You can observe that you have a judgment. You cannot observe why. When you are asked to explain your reasoning, you construct a post hoc explanation, a story that sounds like a cause but is assembled after the fact. That story feels completely real. It is not. You experience the output of a process you have no access to. You interpret that output as direct perception of reality, and then you defend it when challenged. Subscribe. This channel exists for exactly the kind of moment you are in right now. The original finding was about physical appearance and military rank. That framing has stuck. Most descriptions of the halo effect lead with attractiveness. That is the least interesting version of the finding. The halo does not require physical attractiveness. It requires any salient positive trait. Wealth, confidence, fame, eloquence, a compelling story. The trait does not have to be relevant to what is being judged. It just has to be noticeable first. Someone who speaks with authority about one subject gains credibility across all subjects. Not because they earned it in each domain, because the halo transferred it automatically. This is not a modern problem. Thorndike saw it in soldiers being rated by the officers who knew them best. Proximity does not reduce the halo. In some cases, it strengthens it. This is the mechanism behind every influencer you have ever trusted about something outside their original domain. A fitness creator becomes a nutrition authority. A finance creator becomes a relationship expert. A comedian becomes a political commentator. The audience did not consciously decide to extend their trust. The halo did it for them. Morning Consult published data in 2023 showing that 61% of consumers trust influencer recommendations. The basis of that trust is not expertise. It is familiarity, consistency, the accumulation of positive impressions over time. Which is another way of saying, the halo was built incrementally, video by video, post by post. You watch someone be correct and engaging about topic A enough times that when they spoke about topic B, the halo was already in place. The platform accelerates this. An algorithm surfaces the same person repeatedly, consistently framed in their strongest context. Each positive impression reinforces the halo before you have any basis to question it. You did not evaluate their credentials in topic B. You didn't need to. The halo had already made the evaluation for you. A study published in the Journal of Marketing Research found that consumers consistently rate products higher when presented by a liked influencer, regardless of product quality. The quality of the product was irrelevant to the rating. The quality of the relationship with the presenter was everything. This is not gullibility. Thorndike found the same pattern in commanding officers evaluating soldiers under their direct command. These were experienced professionals whose literal job was accurate human evaluation. The halo ran in them just as reliably as in anyone else. Research on hiring decisions consistently finds that interviewers form strong impressions within the first 90 seconds. The rest of the interview is largely spent confirming what was decided before it began. This is the halo effect in one of its most consequential settings. Not a YouTube comment, a career, a person's livelihood shaped by the first thing about them that was noticed. Now the reverse. The horn effect is not a separate phenomenon. It is the halo running in the other direction. One highly negative trait contaminates all subsequent perception. The judgment collapses completely, and it collapses faster than it was built. In 2015, Jared Fogle had been the public face of Subway for 15 years. He had a documented personal story, a weight loss narrative, a halo built on authenticity. In August of that year, he was charged with federal crimes. Within hours, Subway had cut all ties. Once there is, the halo does not dim. It inverts. Everything the person stood for becomes evidence of the deception. The warmth that made them likable becomes manipulation. The consistency that built trust becomes a performance. The expertise that made them credible becomes a mask. This asymmetry is not a flaw in human reasoning. It is a feature. Negative information is weighted more heavily than positive information because the cost of trusting a threat is higher than the cost of doubting an ally. The brain is not optimizing for accuracy. It is optimizing for survival. The halo and the horns are both outputs of the same underlying logic. In a pre-modern environment, a fast global judgment from limited data was often more useful than a slow, accurate one. Speed mattered more than precision when the cost of being wrong was immediate. But we are not living in the environment the brain was optimized for. We are living in an environment where the stimuli that trigger the halo effect have been professionally engineered. Lighting, editing, music, pacing, wardrobe, set design, all of it optimized to produce a specific initial impression. Not just any impression, the impression most likely to produce a halo. Competence, warmth, authenticity, consistency, the exact traits Thorndike's officers could not evaluate independently are the ones content creators are trained to project simultaneously. The halo effect was documented in 1920. The industry that exploits it most systematically did not exist until a century later. But the mechanism is the same. One strong initial impression. Everything after it filtered through that lens. The industry that depends most on manufactured halos has studied this longer than most academic researchers. Marketing, public relations, and talent management all operate on a working model of how the halo effect functions. They do not call it the halo effect. They call it brand building, personal brand, parasocial trust. The vocabulary is different. The mechanism is Thorndike's. There is a question worth sitting with here. Knowing about the halo effect does not protect you from it. Nisbett and Wilson demonstrated that clearly in 1977. The students who knew the most about psychology were not less susceptible. In some conditions, they were more susceptible, because knowing about a bias and noticing it in real time are two completely different cognitive operations. The bias operates at the level of perception before the information reaches the part of the brain that can reflect on it. By the time you are aware of your judgment, the halo has already shaped it. This is not a call for permanent skepticism. Relationships require trust extended beyond what has been strictly verified. The question is not whether to form halos. The question is whether you are aware that you are forming one, and whether the domain you are extending trust into is one where the original halo actually applies. What you can do is slow the process after the fact. Notice when you are making a judgment that is unusually global. When your opinion of one trait seems to have spread automatically to unrelated traits. When someone's competence in one area has become evidence of competence in another. You cannot stop the halo from forming, but you can ask, after it has formed, which part of this judgment did I actually earn through observation? And which part was given to me by a glow I did not choose to see? You formed an opinion about that person before they finished their first sentence. Thorndike called it a constant error. Constant because it does not stop. Constant because almost no one escapes it. Constant because it has been observed in the same form for over 100 years. The halo was always there. In the commanding officer rating his soldier. In the student watching a Belgian professor. In you, deciding how much to trust what you are hearing from someone whose previous work you admired. The only thing that changed is